Ladies and gentlemen, first and foremost, my condolences and my sympathy to each and every one of you. Before we begin this service, I'd like to ask any of you who may have brought your cell phones or beepers or pagers into this chapel to please take a moment to make sure that they have been turned into the silent position or that they have been turned off. We begin the service with words from Kohelet, with words from Ecclesiastes. A season is set for everything, a time for every experience under heaven, a time for dancing and a time for wailing, a time for birthing and a time for dying, a time for speaking and a time for silence, a time for seeking and a time for losing. The time of mourning is a complicated one filled with many emotions and memories, both bitter and sweet. We begin this service with a recitation of psalms and prayers as we link Marvin Knopp's life with the 3,000-year-old tradition of the people Israel and the eternity of God. I'll continue with some verses from Psalm 103. Kerachem ava banim rechem Adonai yireyav, ki hu yada yitzreinu zachor ki afar anachnu. Enosh kechatzir yamav ketzitz hasadeh ken yatzitz. Ki ruach avravo ve'einenu v'lo yakirenu od mekomo. V'chesed Adonai me'olam v'yad olam al yireyav, v'tzidkato livnei vanim. As a father has compassion for his children, so too does God show compassion. God knows how we are fashioned, and God remembers that we are dust. The days of mortals are like grass. We flourish as the flowers of the field. A wind passes over, and they are no more, and no one can recognize where they grew. And yet God's compassion is everlasting. God's kindness to children's children endures age after age, unchanging. I'm going to continue now with the chanting of the 23rd Psalm in the Hebrew, at the conclusion of which I'd like to invite you to join with me in the English, a translation of which is found in the pamphlet you received on your way in. Mizmor leDavid, Adonai roi lo echsar, B'hinot deshayar b'tseini amei menuchot yenachaleni. Nafshi yishovev, nafshi yishovev, yad cheni v'magle tzedek, leman shemo. Gam ki elech begeit salmavet, lo yirara ki ata imadi, shivtecha umishantecha, shivtecha umishantecha. Hemaya nachamoni, taroch lefanai shulchan, taroch lefanai shulchan, taroch lefanai shulchan, neged soderai, dishantav Hashem en roshi, dishantav Hashem en roshi, dishantav Hashem en roshi, Kosi revaya Achtov achesed Yirdefuni Kol yemei chayai Vishavti beveit Adonai Vishavti beveit Adonai Leorech Yamim. Please join me. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Several of Marvin's family members and colleagues and friends are going to speak in his memory this morning, and I would like to first call upon Abby to speak.
You could not spend time with my father without learning something new. Maybe he would share a tidbit of information he had just read in an article or a book. Maybe he would gently or not so gently correct your English usage, followed by a quick look up in the Oxford English Dictionary. Or if you were one of his lucky grandchildren, maybe he would teach you how to represent a 460-degree angle on a piece of paper using a protractor. My father was always learning. He never lost his sense of wonder and excitement. That is part of what made him so wondrous, and partly what made you feel so fortunate to have him in your life. The youngest of four, Marvin Isidore, yes, we made fun of that name, was born on January 4th, 1933 in Chicago. His father was a manual laborer, and neither of his parents had any kind of higher or even secondary education in Eastern Europe. When my father first started school at the age of 6, the teachers thought he was slow. They considered classifying him as what today we would call a special needs student. According to them, it's pretty funny. According to them, he was missing significant vocabulary that any normal child of that age would be expected to know. For example, when he sounded out the word S-M-O-K, he didn't have any idea what it meant because his mother pronounced it schmook. So he said, I don't know what smoke is. That's not smoke, that's schmook. That happened also with the word C-O-U-C-H, which he pronounced karch. He was in many ways a self-educated man. One story that he told me just this past year exemplifies this fact. I work at an organization called the Foundation for Jewish Camp, and I spend time each summer visiting Jewish camps. This past summer, one of the places I went to see was Camp Ramon, Conover, Wisconsin, which was established in 1947. In 1948, when my father was 15 years old, he and a friend saw an advertisement at a local community center. They were looking for sanitation engineers at Camp Ramon. Seeing a great opportunity to get out of the city while making the money that he needed to make, they decided to go. As a sanitation engineer, he washed floors and scrubbed toilets, which he always loved to do. On days off, his friend and the other workers would go into town and have some fun. They'd go swimming, they'd go to bars, they'd meet some girls. But Marvin chose instead to sit in on the many classes about Judaism that were being taught throughout camp. It was so like him to make choices that would expand his knowledge of the world, so like him to challenge himself intellectually. This quality was what propelled him to be the first in his family to get a high school degree, and followed up with a college degree and a PhD in mathematics at the age of 24. But of course, we all know that my father loved to have fun. He was filled with joie de vivre and brought that joyfulness and love of life with him wherever he went. My father could get as much pleasure from a delicious cup of hot coffee as he could from a great concert or a stimulating lecture. He was a huge intellectual, but he still had no pretensions whatsoever about him. A few winters ago, he and I decided we were going to go to Radio City Music Hall to see the Rockettes during Christmas. Not exactly highbrow, but we laughed and we laughed and we laughed at the silliness of it all and had a great time. My father was an outstanding parent. Funny, warm, protective, loving, and steady. There wasn't a time that I needed him that he wasn't there for me. As a young child, he made me feel protected and safe. As an adult child, I felt supported and challenged. I could go on and on about him. But mostly I just want to tell him, Daddy, you were the first love of my life, and you always will be.
At this time, I'm going to invite Karen to share some words.
There are very few times when we come across someone great whose soul is so pure, so genuine, so perfect that we feel like we've become a better person just from being near him. I'm so heartbroken over Marvin's sudden passing because Marvin was that guy. He was that guy. As you know, he passed on the 5th day of Hanukkah. I was waiting to give the guilt that he always gives us on Hanukkah to our children, to the last day. Because we all know the last day is when you get the best gift. And I wanted to explain to my children how important it was to give it on that time. And how, the little things and the little amounts are just the most heartwarming. Marvin was brilliant and patient, a lover of classical music and jazz, Jewish baseball players and show tunes. But he also had this tremendous sense of how to relate to people and how to give people, everyone around him, that sense that he was giving you his undivided attention, whether it's to his children, his grandchildren, my mom, his colleagues, his students, his friends. We all felt Marvin was always there. And I don't know how he had the time for all of us, but he did. He had the time for all of us. And he raised me for the past 29 years. I remember the first time I met him. Mom brought all the kids, all 5 of her kids, into the living room, and there Marvin was sitting on the piano with his little wool or tweed cap. And I just thought he was just so handsome and so wonderful. And then less than a year later, we're all backpacking through Europe to Greece, to Italy, to Israel, Marvin, Mom, and her 5 little terrors. So, if he could manage to do that, in the beginning of a wonderful relationship, it's obviously something. Marvin was my second father. he was the person who taught me to drive, although I'm not too sure anybody's really thrilled about that, because his first word of advice was, Karen, you have to drive in the middle of the road, smack in the middle, because you don't want to hit any of the curbs. You should just stay in the middle. And I guess I still drive like that, because I've been driving the past couple days and I've heard a lot of yelling at me. Marvin tutored me and got angry on my behalf at my math teachers. For example, one of my middle school teachers had this ridiculous way of giving exams, and which was a true-false sometimes. And Marvin was just so angry on my behalf that he marched into my middle school and berated that teacher like nothing else, and I think he scared him into submission. And of course, Marvin read and edited all 17 of my college applications and then visited the schools with me. He taught me to dance. I always loved when Mom and Marv would come to visit me at Duke and we'd go ballroom dancing. I was definitely the only girl, the only college girl there, and it was just so much fun to get dressed up. He taught me to sing, which is why a lot of people definitely hold their ears when I'm singing. In fact, he and I always sang so off tune that the first time I actually heard the real recording of Smoke Gets in Your Eyes, I thought they changed the tune. That wasn't the real tune. And then when I realized the truth, I was really upset. I said, this isn't how it should be. So I like the Marvin version much better. And Marvin completed his role as a loving second father for me when my dad died. Marvin walked me down the aisle at my wedding. Marvin danced with me at my wedding. And he and Mom spent the last couple years building a home at our place in Virginia, and I really thought that they'd be living there with us forever. And he was the best grandfather to my children. My son just always talks, my 3-year-old son, always talked about Pop Pop Marvin, Pop Pop Marvin, Pop Pop Marvin. Whenever he was around, whenever Marvin came over, which was frequent, Nathaniel just clung to him so much. He just loved him so much. What kind of man takes on a divorced mom with 5 wild, young-ish children, a man in love? Mom and Marv's love was admirable and beautiful. They loved many of the same things: music, dancing, travel, beauty, art, old movies, and of course their children and grandchildren. And they also complemented their other differences really well. Everyone knows Mom cooked, Marvin did the dishes. They took great care of each other and my grandma, and they took advantage of their life together. Where did they travel? They hit Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Israel, Korea, Mexico, Holland, Belgium, Wales, England, Scotland, France, Canada, Uruguay, Argentina, Spain, and of course all over the US, including Alaska. And I'm sure there's other places that I couldn't think about. And they couldn't be, and even though the very few times that they were apart, they were just so sad not to be with each other. It amazed me that they would be calling each other. They'd be away for like one day, and they'd be calling each other every hour to check in and see what's going on. So Marvin, thank you. Thank you for being my second dad. Thank you for walking me down the aisle. Thank you for taking care of my mom, for loving her, for rescuing her. Thank you for taking care of my grandma, for entertaining her. Thank you for your stories. Thank you for taking me to concerts and teaching me about music. Thank you for singing silly commercial jingles. I have a hole in my heart, but I'm so thankful of that, because that means it was once filled with something very great.
This time I'd like to call upon Marvin's colleague and friend Jane Friedman to speak in his memory.
Of course, like all of us, I'm heartbroken, I'm speechless. He was a second father to me as well, although I have a wonderful father. I just want to say right off the bat, it was interesting that he taught Karen to drive, because the only bad thing I could possibly say about Marvin is he couldn't drive at all. He was a terrible driver. And I was with him not once but twice when he was pulled over for drunk driving, completely sober. The first time I was in the back of the car, we were very little children. All of us were there. Seth was there, Abby was there. I don't think Ilana was born yet. And we were coming back from Baraboo. And there were these little children. My sister was there too. We were all asleep in the back of the car. And he was driving so erratically that they pulled him over, and then all the little children popped their heads up and they saw it was a nice family excursion, not some drunk back from the bar. But he was always there for me, as he's been for all of us, and he